Alright, sorry I haven't been able to post for the last few weeks. I had some educational and familiar responsibilities, but I have not been idle. I have been working on the responses for the videos that I have posted in my community tab. So I have been researching and reading up on this stuff, and I will be releasing videos as best as I can, and where gaps when nobody's home and it's quiet, or perhaps in my car. Okay, so there is a misconception most Catholics or just general conservatives have about the sexual revolution. It was not just a raunchy time for immorality. No, it was a more complex and multifaceted movement. So while the video does touch on the gay and trans communities, I'm going to be focusing primarily on women, because that's what the video is mostly talking about. Though he does get some facts about the rise of the gay and trans movements incorrect. It was not just gay and trans people were not just a 1960s phenomenon. In fact, in ancient India, there was this third class of gender called Trika Prakriti, I think it's pronounced. It was, and that gender and gay research has been conducted in the 1930s Weimar Republic, but the Nazis burned all of the literature, and the research has only started back up again in the 1960s. So there is much we do not know. There is so much we do not know. Okay, now I will be getting into... Oh, I should mention, he acts like the birth control pill just suddenly, like birth control in general, is just suddenly invented in 1960s with in the year 1960s with the birth control pill, when in fact birth control was a developing technology, with the birth control pill only being a recent development of that technology. In fact, birth control was originally invented in ancient Egypt in 1550 BC, using honey, archaea leaves, I think they're pronounced, and lint. Don't ask me how. Birth control for men was actually mentioned in Genesis. Men were called upon to practice Roitius interruptus. And in 384 to 322 BC, Aristotle actually used cedar oil, lead ointment, and frankincense as spermicides. So yeah, a little fun fact there. Alright, so in Genesis, coming at this from a more Catholic Christian point of view, because that's the community I'm responding to, and as someone, I think, with a Polish Catholic heritage, I think it is appropriate me to address this. So, in Genesis, the original word for helper was Ezer, which more accurately translates to rescuer. So, Eve rescued Adam from his loneliness. And how was Eve treated throughout history? Well, women could not vote or participate in government. They could not hold political office. They could not own property. They could not choose their own spouse. They could not divorce. They could not inherit equally. They could not testify in court. They could not enter universities or professions. They could not hold any authority in the church. They could not own land. They could not refuse marital sex. They could not sign contracts. They could not own businesses. They could not control their own money. They could not keep custody of children. They could not open bank accounts. They could not serve on a jury. They could not serve in combat. They could not get credit cards or loans until 1974. Alright, so the historical definition of patriarchy, not what the wokies would tell you. So, the original definition was women were legal dependents, reproductive labor, and property of the family. And they were not full citizens or considered full persons. Feminism, the original definition, not the wokey one, feminism was women can choose to get married, have a career, or both. They are not mutually exclusive. That is all feminism means. That is it. Now, the period the women's movement originally started was in between 1957 and 1962. And by the way, I'm getting most of my information, not all, I misspoke. Most of my information from a video of a man who lived during the women's movement. Alright, so The Feminine Mystique was published in 1963. The main thesis of this book is that the mass media, the educators, the social scientists, and politicians of the time were creating a traditional image of women to maintain male power, and that women were expected to find this role they constructed fulfilling. Women were expected to pity other women that wanted to be educated. So, women who did not just want to be a homemaker, like, let's say, I don't know, a doctor, were looked upon with pity, or were expected to. Other women were expected to look upon those women with pity. Alright, so, women already felt unfulfilled, trapped, and needed new options to achieve self-actualization, which is a high priority on the Maslow hierarchy of needs. Essentially, society told women to be happy when they were not. And to prove this, the success of the feminine mystique was that there was already an audience ready to hear it. And that audience was women at the time. So women were not all happy with the traditional roles that were assigned.
But in fact, what we know is that there was a great concern about women's discontent just as the 1960s were beginning. Magazines like Newsweek and Time did cover stories about women's discontent. Newspapers like the New York Times ran editorials about why women were unhappy. One magazine, Redbook, asked readers, "Why are young mothers discontented?" It received 40,000 replies. Clearly, underneath the surface, there was a great deal of unhappiness with the way women's roles were structured and the kind of aspirations that women were allowed.
Alright, so there is a major mindset in the 1950s. From conformity, it shifted to growth in the 1960s. So, what I mean by conformity is that you were not expected to change your current living situation. You were just expected to deal with it. While growth challenges those constraints of the living situation to make them better. In 1968, Nelson Rockefeller lost the presidency due to his divorce. So just to show you how rigid these rules were, somebody lost the presidency for violating them, and 2 decades later, it became possible to, win while divorced. And by the way, this happened in 1968, even after The Feminine Mystique was published. So alright, so marriage, the idea of marriage based on a genuine connection with your partner was a sexual revolution value. It was not, and that marriages that did not have that mutual connection with their partner, people were not expected or forced to stay in them. So that's what the high divorce rate, and by extension, the birth control was. It was, people were expected to marry young, and they did not mature enough to find a partner they genuinely connected with. The Equal Pay Act of 1963 was passed because 1/3 of companies had a different lower pay scale for women prior to anti-discrimination laws. The anti-discrimination laws were passed in the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which made it illegal to discriminate against women in employment and promotion. But unfortunately, the federal government did not enforce the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which caused women's organizations to prop up and for independent movement on college, independent women's movement on college campuses to rise. The women's movement only got attention in 1968 when the Miss America pageants, in that pageant, women protested and crowned a sheep. Yeah, which I find a little funny. So, feminism did not produce a backlash from men. Men were mostly neutral. In fact, the feminist movement, or women's movement, produced a backlash from other women who defined themselves solely by being a wife and a mother. So I do not think being a wife and a mother is bad, obviously, because I was born and I have a mother. I think it is not, I don't think people should be forced into a traditional lifestyle just because another person adopts it. So these women were part of the pro-family movement, and their core driving force was their way of life, traditional way of life, felt threatened by other women not adopting it. And so they wanted to ban abortion and contraceptives, as well as graphic and violent and sexual media on TV and elsewhere. So, I believe that there is a spectrum between rigidity and flexibility, and stability and instability. the more rigid a family is, the more stable it is. And the more flexible the family is, the more unstable it is. So on the far end of the spectrum would be the families of the 1950s. And on the more flexible end of the spectrum, I would consider open relationships that have more than one spouse. So, and I think as a society, we need to find a balance between flexibility, rigidity, stability, and instability. The ideal is to have a family unit that is flexible, but at the same time stable. Because the victims of the political conflict of the sexual revolution were children. So children had frequent unstable homes and were heavily exposed to violent and sexual media. And the effects of this is still seen throughout Gen X and even today with Gen Alpha. So I think that's where the concern lies. Yeah, I think that's where the concern lies. It lies with a way of life feeling threatened or trivialized, and with the effects it has on children, which again is an understandable fear. But at the same time, we cannot let fear guide our decisions. We need to find a balance between flexible gender roles and family stability. So, instead of a moral crusade, we should be seeking a balanced unit. And that is all that I have to say. Goodbye.